Hello and welcome back. Our topic for this video, again, we're going to discuss in more detail some chemical bonds. You may have noticed from the last video, I've now changed the order of these bonds, and I did that intentionally because what I want to do is one of the things I also want you to take away from understanding about different chemical bonds is that some chemical bonds are stronger than others. All right? Our strongest chemical bond is going to be the covalent bond. Once a covalent bond is made, it's really difficult to pull those back apart. Okay? Covalent bonds are going to be really important because we're going to talk about covalent bonding when we talk about the DNA double helix. It's important for that DNA that holds all the information that makes you up to not be able to be pulled apart easily. Okay, so you've got strong bonds that make up DNA. You've got covalent bonds that make up proteins. Okay, so covalent bonds are going to be very important in biology. They're going to be our strongest bond. Okay, if we go all the way down here to number 4, this is going to be our weakest type of chemical bond. Okay, hydrogen bonds are also going to be found within the DNA double helix. Okay, and why you've got hydrogen bonds which are weak and covalent bonds which are strong, we're going to discuss when we go over the physical structure of DNA. Okay, but I'll give you the punchline now. The punchline now is the hydrogen bonds are going to be what allow that DNA double helix to replicate, to make copies of itself. Because to make a copy, you have to be able to pull it apart to use one strand as a template or an example of what it should be. Okay? So in terms of our bonds, we go from strongest to weakest in this list. Okay? Now in terms of our different types of bonds, the polar covalent and the covalent bonds are going to be shared electrons. That's what makes these a stronger bond, is in that outer shell, neither element wants to totally give up the electron, but to have its shell filled, it is willing to share an electron with another element. Okay? So we've got covalent, polar covalent, sharing electrons. Our ionic bonds, remember from last class, are going to totally donate electrons, like with sodium and chloride. Okay, the sodium totally donates the electron to the chloride atom. Okay, so in terms of that, the ionic bond isn't quite as strong as a shared electron would be. So it's not as strong as covalent and polar covalent. Okay, hydrogen bonds are our weakest bond. They're going to be a little bit unique. All right, hydrogen bonds are going to essentially happen because of the polar covalent bonds that are in a particular solution. Okay, so hydrogen bonds are weak, and I'm going to have a separate video discussing more detail about the hydrogen bonds. All right, what I want to kind of focus on in this video are the covalent bonds, because those are our strongest bonds. Okay, so I'm going to draw here. This is going to be the nucleus. We'll call it nuke for short, of our two elements that are going to share electrons. Okay? And in terms of this, I'm going to draw the electron shells. Okay? And you can assume in here there's going to be an electron shell in the center that's filled, right? There's going to be an electron shell. This is filled here. Okay? Actually, let me do this one in a different color. I think that might be a little bit easier for you to see the sharing. So, unfortunately, this board is not as easy to erase as a whiteboard in a regular classroom, but that's okay. All right, so we'll use pink over here. Okay, again, I'm not so concerned giving you specific examples of elements here. And that's a wonky circle. That's okay. Okay. The point that I'm going to have associated with this is we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, in there. And what you've got here, because each of these elements is missing an electron in that outermost shell, it's going to want to share another electron with the other element. So in this case, I've got one of our electrons here is pink, one is blue, okay? And each of those two elements is sharing those electrons there. And that completes the outer shell for each of these two elements, okay? So the shared electron is what's going to give us a covalent bond, okay? And these are not going to want to easily let go, all right? So this would be an example of a covalent bond where we're going to have some covalent bonds in biology are going to be in the DNA double helix, in proteins, in carbohydrates, and we'll also see them in lipids. Okay? So the covalent bond is very relevant to biology. All right? So in terms of that, this is going to be our covalent bond. All right? We also have, and I've got up here, the polar covalent bond. All right? And in terms of the polar covalent bond, my best example for that is going to be water. Because what you've got that makes up water, right, the chemical structure of water is H2O. What that tells you is that you've got one oxygen, two hydrogens, okay? And in terms of that water molecule, okay, oxygen in its outer shell, it needs 2 electrons to complete its outer shell. Hydrogen has 1 electron that it can share with. It needs 1 electron to complete its outer shell, okay? So in terms of that, we've got 2 hydrogens that will share electrons with an oxygen. That's where the H2 comes from. That subset of 2 tells you how many hydrogens are connected to the oxygen, okay? But what's unique about oxygen, all right? Oxygen I kind of think of as that selfish kid. That selfish kid that doesn't really want to share their toys but reluctantly does so, okay? That's what oxygen does, all right? Oxygen has essentially a slight negative charge because it's the selfish kid. It wants those electrons more than hydrogen. So the way I think about it is oxygen plays with that toy longer than hydrogen gets to, okay? But again, hydrogen doesn't want to have that empty shell, so it hangs around so that it can have a completed shell. All right? And if you notice, I've got a weird little symbol here. This is just really representing a partial negative. This is a partial positive. Okay? So in terms of water, overall, one portion of the molecule is slightly negative. One portion is slightly positive. This is our polar covalent bond. All right? Hydrogen isn't going to let go of oxygen. Oxygen doesn't want to let go of hydrogen. But you create kind of an imbalance in the molecule. And you've got one end that's more negative, one end that's more positive. Okay? That's what gives rise to our polar covalent bond. Okay? You've got essentially an unequal sharing of electrons. All right. Hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, please let me know.